here with Jim Blake, author and CEO of Unity World Headquarters, and we are talking about his new book, The Zen Executive. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
No, it's great having you here. And I'm excited about your book. And I'm wondering, just starting off here in our conversation, what was the impetus for you writing the book?
Oh, goodness. I would say through my 20 plus years of experience, so I have an undergrad in technology. I spent most of my career in technology. I had an opportunity to work for some global leading companies, lots of regional leading companies. And through that time, I had a number of experiences with leadership and culture. And honestly, I mostly experienced what didn't work. What stuck with me was what didn't work from a culture perspective and what didn't work from a leadership perspective. And the longer I progressed in my leadership career, the more I began to understand there has to be a better way to do this. And so honestly, the impetus for the book was to really communicate that, look, there is a different way to do this that can garner even greater results than you're experiencing maybe than with the old paradigms of leadership. And hopefully enough people will be inspired by that they will look at a new way of being in terms of how to lead and exist in a corporate world.
And what were some of the things that stood out to you that did not work?
Well, I think the leadership models, and I mentioned a couple of these in the book, like the leadership style of fear and intimidation or command and control. Leadership style of fear and intimidation, it may get short-term results, but I think what's missing and what people have missed is the larger impact that has on the teams and the people that you serve with. So when you spend most of your time in an anxious state of consciousness, afraid to make a mistake, afraid to bring forth any ideas, afraid to miss deadlines. So first of all, that takes a toll on you physically. It also takes a toll on you mentally and emotionally. And what I can tell leaders is you're definitely not getting the most out of your associates when they're scared and anxious all the time. That is not the way that people perform their best. And then secondly, the ripple effect that has is detrimental because you can't leave that at the office. And so people take that anxiousness or that stress or even anger and frustration, and they go out into the world with it. They go home with it to their friends and families and pets and the people on the road on the way home. And so it's not only not effective in terms of performance and results, but you're also creating a ripple effect that I don't think is very healthy for any of us long term. And same sort of thing with command and control, where it's more of an authoritarian style where everything has to be done a particular way. What people miss is the creativity. When you don't have a lot of transparency and respect and people feel comfortable coming forward, when that sort of environment exists where it's supportive and uplifting, people will bring forth creativity and inspiration that will change and transform your business and improve operations, not to mention their own productivity. And so when you have leadership styles that squelch that, if you will, you miss those opportunities.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book adopting servant leadership, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that is and what that looks like and how to adopt it.
Yep. So there is a lot of information. If you just Google servant leadership, you'll find that it is an increasing in acceptance in terms of style. But basically, it sort of reverses the old paradigm. So if you think of the old paradigm as a pyramid where the CEOs and the leaders were at the top of the pyramid and the most important people in the organization, if you just turn that upside down, where the people that are doing the day-to-day work with your constituents and those you serve, those are the most important people in the organization. And your leaders and managers are really there to do a handful of things: provide the resources and tools they need to do their job most effectively, create an environment of support, compassion, and empathy, and then offer any number of ways to help and support and acknowledge and lift up those folks. And so if in a servant leader culture, if you stay focused on those things, your productivity will skyrocket because you create an environment where people feel supported, they feel comfortable, there's no stress, there's no anxiety, and you're going to get their best performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you're a team. You're a team, and you're working together, and it's this kind of equality rather than who's up, who's down. The hierarchical model,
Exactly.
which is really important. I will share this. The term servant leadership bothers me a little bit, simply because it's a term that's adopted in corporate culture, but I think that it reinforces the hierarchy using the term servant. So I just keep wanting to call it in-service leadership. But
No,
that's
I like that.
me.
I like that. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. But the point is so well made, and that is so much about what your book is talking about and demonstrating how you can do that. And one of the things that strikes me is you're talking about self-care and how important self-care is in the workplace and for CEOs as well as the staff.
Yeah, precisely. Whether you're a leader or not, and I typically will go to this example. So let's think about professional athletes.
Mhm.
Professional athletes all have doctors, and they have chefs, and they have trainers, and they have these incredible regimens for diets and training, all in preparation for their day of performance or their time of performance. And so all of those things they take into consideration as they prepare for their performance. And I think that gets lost on us. We think because we're not, so highly visible and in these highly paid professional. But what I want to suggest is those tools and techniques are a model that we can also lean into. So think about whether you're a leader or just someone who's in a day-to-day job. If you don't have enough sleep, are you performing at your best? Are you making the best decisions? What if you're having a really tough day and there's a lot of emotion? You're angry and super frustrated, and you carry that with you for the next 6 hours. Well, how many decisions do you make, or how many interactions do you have where those emotions have impacted that decision? I think we would all agree that making a decision from an emotional state doesn't always render the results that we might hope for. And so the whole idea around self-care, and it's all three, it's mental, emotional, physical, and then also spiritual. So it's really four. But the idea is to get yourself to a place where you have spent some time caring for yourself in all of those areas. Because when you do, then your cup is full. You can't pour from an empty cup. And so the emptier we are, the more we may have resentment or exhaustion or stress or anxiety. Whereas if we feel fulfilled and we're taking care of ourselves and we're eating right and staying hydrated and getting enough sleep, making sure our emotional and spiritual needs are met, then we're in this beautiful position where we can be at peak performance and we're making great decisions because we feel taken care of and we feel solid and centered in our foundation. If that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And do you have any suggestions for people who might want to engage in self-care but are finding it difficult?
Yeah, so that's always the toughest part, right? People feel like their schedules are so full, and what I really want to advocate for is that this is something you have to make a priority. In fact, I would argue that you should put yourself first. And so take a look at your schedule, take a look at your commitments, look to friends, neighbors, families, partners, and figure out a way to get some time to put yourself first, because everything you do following that will be better. I promise you, your relationships, your performance, your decision making, how you show up in the world will be better. And I would also argue that things will come together more easily and more naturally because you're not struggling as much and you're operating from this place of fulfillment and center. And when you operate from that place of being centered, you allow for inspiration and guidance and things to come in that you don't necessarily account for when you're just so busy and spiraling all the time in the chattering mind. And so I would say do whatever you can to use as many resources as you can, and start small. Start with one thing and then work your way into others. For instance, when I first started, I would get a massage every 6 weeks as just one of my things of self-care. And then I began to add in more things. So now I know I'm a morning person as it relates to exercise. So the first thing I do every day is to get my movement in, whatever that be, whether it's a workout or yoga or golf or what have you, because I just know that I'm a better person when I have that completed. I feel better physically and I feel better mentally and emotionally. So I would just advocate that however you can begin to prioritize yourself, find a way to do that.
That's really helpful. And, it feels like, and this, on the one hand, like it's simple, okay, we'll create a routine and do that. But it's what we're really talking about is a paradigm shift, a cultural and corporate paradigm shift, because we do have this tendency to not put ourselves first, whether we're mothers or caregivers or, fathers or, whatever it is. There's this tendency, especially in our culture, to give from the empty cup without realizing it, to use your metaphor.
No, you are exactly right. And that is it. It is an extreme paradigm shift because that's rooted in this Western culture in almost everything, just as you mentioned. And so there's this myth that the harder and longer you work, the greater the results will be. And look, this isn't just Jim's philosophy. There's data out there. There's tons of data and studies that have been done that suggest 70-hour work weeks are completely ineffective. You're now finally in the West beginning to see organizations take a look at a 4-day work week because people are starting to understand the impact of balance and self-care and how that impacts performance and how it impacts how it impacts the individuals. And so you are exactly right. It is a paradigm shift. And that's one of the things, another reason why I wrote the book is I wanted leaders to be able to understand that that's okay, that you can allow your teams, in fact, encourage them to use their PTO, be understanding when they need to take time off, be free and friendly with mental health days, because the better health a person is in mentally, emotionally, and physically, the better they're going to perform when they're in the office.
Absolutely. You mentioned something else that occurs as a result, to kind of go to the positives of self-care, is there's a kind of these ideas and thoughts come. It's like you've created a spaciousness within your consciousness, within your mind, that's not being busied by the monkey mind, as it's sometimes referred to. So in creating this spaciousness, not only are you creating a place of rest, but you're creating a place of sort of receptivity, maybe.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's really powerful. And a lot of people, so for me, for instance, I lean into meditation for that. I want to be able to still the chattering mind that's always going on about my to-do list, or being self-critical about this, or focusing on something in the past or something in the future. So I spend a few minutes a day just being still each morning. And that, to your point, provides the space for inspiration and guidance and creativity to come in. And sometimes it comes in during my stillness, and other times it shows up later in the day. So what happens is, when you create that space, whatever it is during the day. And so what I want to say here is, meditation is what works for me. And I'm one of those perfectionist people, right? So when I first heard and people wanted me to try meditation, I went and read like 30 books because I had to do it perfectly. And what I've learned is there's no perfect way to meditate. There's no perfect way to get to this space. It's whatever works for you. Some people find it on the yoga mat. Others find it gardening. Some find it in a nature walk. Others just sitting outside. And so others exercising. So whatever that is that sort of gives you that place of peace where you check out from the mind and sort of become present with the body and really become present with the moment, do that. Because again, the frequency of aha moments and things like coincidences, all these little coincidences will start to show up. You begin to sort of be in the right place at the right time, and you remove any limitations you had for yourself almost unconsciously. And so you see things in a different way, and you see opportunities differently, and the world really begins to open up. And so I think it's so important to find a way to just create that space each day where you can find that place of peace, whatever that is for you, and be open to that inspiration and guidance, because it really is a life-changing experience.
Yeah, it's so important. And you emphasize that in the book. And, I just want to pick up on what you said about, reading all the books and you're going to do it the best. That's part of our culture, right? It's like, you've got to do it right. And, I'm going to be the best meditator, the best yoga person, or at the very least, I don't want to mess up. I hear a lot of times people say, oh, I'm no good at meditating. There's not a no good, right? It's just,
right.
it's a practice. So if you're having intrusive thoughts, well, you're meditating and you're noticing what's going on with your mind. That's kind of what meditation is. And then you develop this muscle that helps you stop the intrusive thoughts. Maybe you stop the intrusive thought sooner than letting it go for longer periods of time or something like that. But what you've described and how it helps you is that it helps you center and create spaciousness. And I'm with you on, I think meditation is many things and can be for many people. So, whether it's being in a contemplative space or being out in nature and being quiet. And I think it's helpful for people to see it as not this one thing that you have to do a certain way, right?
Exactly. And so many people, for a long time, I thought I was the only person in the world that had this mind that was constantly chattering and in the past or in the future or working on the next to-do list. And so it was really helpful for me to understand that we all have that, and that there are techniques you're not always going to be able to stop your thinking or control your thoughts, but you touched on it. The idea is to become aware that they're there, and then begin to sort of lean away from them. So they're going to come, just let them pass like clouds, while you remain present in whatever that practice is that you're engaged in.
Yeah. And when you do that, it really changes things. It really does, doesn't it?
It does. And what the thing that was most profound for me is, and why I think it's important that you called it a practice earlier, the more I begin to do it, the more I notice sort of unconsciously that I would call on it more frequently during the day. So I would sort of begin to feel myself becoming uptight or anxious, and I would naturally begin to calm down, slow my breathing, and almost go to that meditative place, just for a few moments to sort of separate myself from whatever was beginning to spike at that moment. And it just sort of happened naturally. And so I really appreciated that unfolding as well as a result of this practice.
Yeah, it may actually be an inherent necessary tool for navigating being human.
No kidding.
It's kind of my thought.
No kidding.
So what got you into meditating? What's your background there?
Honestly, as I mentioned, I spent over 25 years in the corporate world, and I happen to work at a 100-plus-year-old spiritual nonprofit now. That's where I serve at Unity World headquarters. They do a lot of publishing. They have a prayer ministry. They do retreats and events at this large 1,200-acre campus. But I had served with them in 2006 to 2011. And so that's really where I began to get introduced to their non-denominational spiritual principles. And one of the principles they advocate is just that. It's becoming still. It's creating a space to be able to come in contact with the divine, whatever that represents for you. And I got to be honest, I was a skeptic. I mean, I was really, really skeptical. And as I mentioned, I read all the books and I wasn't sure it was going to work. And then I just became so shocked by the results. And so so many people here were advocating for it. And in a lot of cases, meetings were started with it. And so it took me a while to get my head and my heart around it. But once I really opened up and embraced it, it was life-changing for me.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And you were also a minister, is that right?
Yeah. Last year I was ordained as a minister. So it took me almost 8 years to get my master's of divinity, and I had to do it in a couple of different schools. But I did complete that. And once I completed it, I was offered the opportunity to be ordained here and in the place and in the spiritual realm where I work. And so I gladly accepted and felt really honored by that privilege.
Oh, that's great. Well, in the book, you are talking about, bringing some what we call spiritual practice into the workplace. And I think that, spiritual different people have different reactions to the term, but you have a quote in your book that defines it in a way that I think is very helpful. Spiritual activities can be anything that we do with a spirit consciousness, with a sense of love, service, or kindness.
Yep, and that's true of really any task. And so I think people, as you mentioned, sort of put this big amount of pressure around what it means to be spiritual at work, and there's this label, and there's this compartmentalization. I can't bring my way of being that I am with my friends and family around my spiritual life into the workplace, because it's all about business and results and performance. And my suggestion is you can blend those two. You can be that person in the workplace. Is it uncommon? Probably. I can tell you that my leadership style, especially in the last couple of stops before I returned back to Unity, I was a zebra. I was different. I didn't lead like everyone else. In fact, that's where this book got its title. There's a story in the book about how a leader had sort of labeled me. They thought they were getting sort of this linebacker presence because I have a pretty sizable physical stature. And they ended up saying, but you're this Zen Buddhist guy. And so they weren't able to connect the two in terms of their own understanding. And so the opportunity that we all have to take that idea of kindness and compassion into the workplace, you don't have to push people beyond their limits and constantly be challenging and have this stance of defensiveness and continuous drive for success. You can get a lot of the same results with compassion and service and empathy and kindness. And it may look a little different, but you'll feel better as a person. And I guarantee you people will notice it, and you'll even inspire people to model it for themselves.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. And of course, I'm here in San Francisco, where we are seeing, and I think we are seeing in the larger culture throughout the nation as well, more of this coming into play in corporate settings, where whether it's Salesforce and Google with meditation rooms, and encouraging these different practices of self-care, and and finding the productivity in that. So it does feel like it's changing. I'm wondering what you're seeing, if you're noticing that change, or what you think of it.
No, I feel the same way. And it's one of the things, being in tech, I was always in touch with the trends in the Valley. And so, out of Silicon Valley on the West Coast, San Francisco, and all those large cities where there's such a large technology presence. Technology people do a lot of things based on data. It's just sort of how we're wired. And so they were very early able to see some of the things that I'm talking about, and actually put some of the studies together that I'm talking about in terms of how these things impact performance. And so they have certainly had a large influence. And I do think in the more progressive companies that follow suit as it relates to tech companies, you're seeing it. But I still think we have a long way to go in some of the conservative vertical industries, like banking and finance and utilities and things of that nature. So I still think there's a tremendous opportunity to see it be applied across all the different verticals in this country. But I will agree with you. I am heartened by the progress that we've made, and that there are companies being much more progressive in adopting these practices for the health of their organization and their people.
That's great. How important do you feel compassion practices in a corporate culture, and particularly for a CEO?
So for me, I think it's one of the most important virtues or values. And in the book, I talk about some pillars, for how to create a healthy culture. And so one of the things that's most important is transparency and trust and respect. Mm-hmm. And people will have a hard time trusting and respecting you if they don't feel heard, if they don't feel like they can share with you, honestly and transparently, without some sort of punitive repercussion. And so the ability to be a compassionate listener, to listen deeply, even when you don't agree with what's being said or what maybe is coming in, is so important. And that's just one aspect of compassion. But the listening piece is one of the more important pieces, because when you can give people the opportunity to feel heard, that also sort of accompanies being seen. I feel like I've been heard. I feel like I'm being seen, which all of a sudden increases my intrinsic value and how I feel valued by you. And that all gets accomplished with just some simple compassion around listening to people and having some understanding and empathy for, you mentioned it earlier, just being human. Listen, we all want to do a good job. We all want our companies to be successful, and life happens. And people need empathy and understanding when they all of a sudden become a caregiver, or there's an unexpected illness in the family, or they've had some form of tragedy. And so the more compassion you can provide around those situations, people want to know how they create engagement. That's how you create engagement. You simply become a compassionate leader and have your people feel supported, seen, and heard. And all of a sudden, they will become deeply engaged in your organization.
Mm. Sounds like a great organization and a great society to live in. So
Indeed.
it's wonderful to be moving that forward. How important and what do you see the effect of having diversity in the workplace?
So I spend a good amount of time, or at least a portion of a section, on the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the book. And I sort of set it up in a couple of different ways. The first way is an appeal to sort of the intrinsic humanity and necessity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's the idea of removing sort of the systemic racism and other systems of segregation and inequity that have been put in place over the last 100 years. Mm-hmm. And I talk about the importance and our connection in terms of just all being human and that sort of oneness. We're all in this together, and the value and impact of creating diverse teams. And if you're not at all moved by any of those sort of altruistic values, I spend a lot of time citing data, because there have been a ton of studies done on just the sheer data, and in terms of the more viewpoints you can have at the table. So the different lived experiences allow you to have fresher, more creative ideas. They increase productivity, and it certainly gives you a new level of inspiration when you have a lot of different viewpoints sitting at the table. The second thing I would say, particularly if you're in product and service organizations, when you're looking at your customer set and people you're trying to attract, people feel most comfortable working with organizations where they can see themselves or a version of themselves. I hope that makes sense. But when they can see themselves being served in your organization, then they feel much more comfortable. Same thing when you're trying to attract talent. When people can see versions of themselves in your organization, then they know they feel safe coming there and participating in your company and in your culture. And again, these are not Jim's philosophies. The data speaks for itself. The more diverse culture and population you have in your organization, the more successful your organization is from a financial perspective, the higher the performance is, and the greater level of talent you have in comparison to companies that don't have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
Yeah, we're also in kind of a sea change with that, right? I've heard that companies have difficulty diversifying, whether it's, I don't understand all the reasons for it, but it seems like that I remember hearing someone who is a kind of a headhunter who helps companies diversify, that, they have trouble bringing people to the organization, or internally within the organization, getting the organization to, I don't know if it's recognize the importance, but it seems to be some obstacles, and maybe I'm not clear on what those obstacles are, but maybe you have some ideas about what we're experiencing now that has made it difficult, and how we can move forward into more diverse corporate cultures.
Sure. So look, when we started this effort way back in 2016, so before it really became such a notable item, we struggled mightily with a lot of the things you're talking about. So what I mean is, the organization at that point was predominantly white.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard to attract people of color or people of different nationalities when, as I mentioned earlier, they don't see themselves in the organization.
Yeah.
Or when the few that are there tell you, quite plainly, I don't have a very pleasant experience here. I don't feel accepted. I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the that's why if you're going to do this, you have to fully commit to it. And when I say that, that means begin with training your existing staff. So raising the cultural competency of the entire organization. And you do that through DEI training and coursework and exercises and helping people understand the ideas of racism and sexism and privilege and really bringing that top of mind so that every person in the organization has a new level of cultural competency. Once they have that, they become more sensitive. Mm-hmm. And so now you've sort of up-leveled the environment. And now everybody understands this is a priority. We now understand what all these terms are, and we understand how we can be more sensitive as we attract and recruit different and diverse populations. And so once you then have that foundation in place, then it takes really strategic planning. I mean, the way we did this was just as I described. We first raised our level of cultural competency. Then we created some strategic objectives that we measure quarterly and really try to achieve in terms of changing our hiring practices, changing our job descriptions, changing how many people of color we interview for each and every job. And so it takes a real commitment, going out and finding different sources and establishing relationships with different organizations to create inroads for people of different nationalities and color to come into the organization. So it is quite a commitment, and there are certainly those obstacles because it becomes this vicious cycle if you don't do sort of all of these things together. I hope that makes sense.
It really does. It really does, and it's helpful. And what I'm hearing is that the commitment is key, and the commitment is followed up by action and checking and rechecking and checking where you are in terms of your goals with that. And I imagine as you embark on something like that, the people in the company of different cultures would feel that level of support. So, and the trainings you mentioned are absolutely key, because I think it helps bring everyone to the table, and it kind of, what's the word? Not flattens, but makes equal everyone at the table, and helps to demystify things in a way, and also to helps people to. I think a lot of times people are defensive, on all sides. They with things they don't understand, or if they're being accused of something, or if they're being judged in some way for whatever, however they are. So those trainings become a real place where everyone can come together and look at things in a non-judgmental, productive way. So, yeah, thank you.
You're absolutely right. And look, in the beginning, it's awkward because these are concepts and topics that for some reason in the West were not talked about, and certainly not discussed, and not talked about in the workplace. And so when you surface all those issues and then sort of bring them out into the open and not be afraid to talk about them, as you mentioned, the walls of defensiveness go away. People all of a sudden begin to have understanding. They start to see the world from someone else's viewpoint. And as you mentioned, it sort of creates this, wow, we really are all in this together. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the separation that existed previously begins to melt away.
Yeah, really, really helpful. So, Jim, what is your hope in terms of what people will take away from the book?
I think primarily, and we talked about this early on in the podcast, but my hope really is that whether you're a leader or not, you can get to a place of self-awareness where you understand how your thoughts and emotions impact how you show up. Not only do they impact how you show up, they impact how you perform, but primarily they impact how you show up and how you interact with other people. And that creates a ripple effect. So as I mentioned, if you're moving through your day in anger and anxiety and frustration, you're treating people in a particular way. You're making decisions in a particular way, and probably not in a good way. And so my biggest hope is that people will use some of the tools and techniques in the book to understand the influence that they have and can have. Instead of that being a negative ripple effect in the world, they're able to create a positive ripple effect in the world, that their associates and their team members are going home feeling supported and uplifted and energized and inspired by the work rather than the opposite of that.
And so like regularly checking in with your team and seeing how they're doing, and on across all levels. So it's very inspiring. I feel like the book is really helpful and very inspiring to people, and especially for folks who've been trying to figure out, leaders who are trying to figure out how to bring this more into their lives and into their leadership style. So I'm excited for you, and I'm excited for the book. What's next for you?
Really a lot of this. So a lot of talking to people about the book and the principles. I've had a couple of organizations reach out and ask if I would come and consider a workshop. And so we've started putting together a small outline of what a workshop might look like that would result in sort of a series of steps you could take to begin to integrate some of these practices and principles into your workplace. So that's directionally where we're headed. I think we're a bit of a ways off since the book just came out, but I think that's where we're headed going forward.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast, and wish you well with the book and everything that you're doing. How best to find you do you have your own website or your organization's website?
I do. I created a website that is dedicated to the book, and that is simply IamJimBlake.com. So if you go there, there's a lot of information about the book, as well as some samples of the gems of wisdom that we include in each of the chapters. You can find the book there. You can find it on Amazon. And then the organization where I'm serving now, the non-denominational 100-plus-year-old spiritual institution that I talked about, if you'll go to unity.org, you'll find that to be a wealth of resources. It's not centered around who we are as an organization. It's really the entire website is a collection of tools and resources that can help us cope with the everyday issues and challenges we face. So things like grief and prosperity, addiction, being a caregiver, facing end-of-life issues. So there's just a wealth of material out there on that website at unity.org that can help people who are struggling and looking for some spiritual content to help them through those sort of day-to-day struggles that we all face.
Great. And we'll have your link on our website, and so people can find you there too. So thank you again, Jim. I look forward to interviewing you again when your next book comes out.
It was truly my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.